evening, everyone. I have a new mic. I have a new mic arm. We are back from our house sitting adventures. We had a great time. I'm curious what new problems I'll run into this evening. Arms are kind of frustrating to me because when I was at Timcast, they had to put mine at a really weird angle, so I never got it. This is why I was constantly fidgeting with it on Timcast videos. I was constantly like, where do I move this to? How do I put this best? And of course, I had to take notes. So to move it every time I was trying to take notes and keep track of what was going on in the stream. But in any case, I'm really glad to have this arm and I'm excited for the future. I think that Andy and I are going to try to do a stream tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Definitely stay tuned for that. Always a good time. We're still working on the studio and I'm already talking to people about being guests with me. So definitely looking forward to that. So I'm going to try something a little bit different this evening. Thank you guys for joining me on Black Friday, by the way. I hope you guys had a nice Thanksgiving. We are going to talk about Thanksgiving a little bit this evening and I'm kind of excited about it because there are some doozies out there lately. I think that Thanksgiving just kind of breaks people's brains a little bit, which I think is fine. I think that's a little bit hilarious. But I think that what we're seeing now is them kind of losing control of the narrative, which I'm definitely here for. But the big focus of tonight is going to have to be Elon Musk because he is so entertaining. He responded to me the other day, which is always fun and exciting. He is so active on this platform that he bought. I think it's great that he's so involved with it since he's going to be since he is now running it. I think it's wonderful that he's using it and he can kind of see some of the problems that users are running into as he does his own thing on Twitter. I think that's awesome. So I hope that you guys were able to have peaceful Thanksgivings. I know that we were seeing a lot of silly propaganda from, for example, Ron Klain at the White House and a lot of stuff coming out of the White House saying, oh, look, all of this great stuff Joe Biden's done. I don't know about you guys, but it really seemed like there was not really an appetite for discussing that kind of thing. I feel like people are kind of exhausted after like COVID lockdowns, vaccine stuff, and all of these. The most recent midterms, over at Making the Argument with Nick Freitas, who's my boss, that podcast, we talked about some good ways to, if you have to have these conversations, to keep them smooth and peaceful and focus on maintaining your relationships with your family, because that's really the most important things at the end of the day. And hopefully you guys were able to do that. I know that we sure were. We had a great time with family over Thanksgiving. We got to see everybody. We had that big old feast. I made a couple different pies. I made buttermilk and key lime pie. Buttermilk was something that my mom used to make. I'm not sure where she got that recipe, but I'm finding that for me, a lot of these foods are very sentimental. I really like buttermilk pie because it reminds me of when I was little. I found it delicious, and that was one of my favorite things to eat. And then also blueberry bagels I used to eat with my grandma. That was really important to me too. So the whole ethos of Thanksgiving is really powerful to me. I find it very meaningful to be able to connect with family over that stuff. And hopefully you guys got to do some of that stuff too. But let's talk about Elon Musk. And in keeping with what we were just talking about, he tweeted out, Thanksgiving cuisine is such a delightful symphony of flavor, which I was just tickled by. I thought it was awesome. I think he's a hilarious character, and I think the leftist reaction to him is just a sign that they don't know how to meme, because Elon Musk strikes me very much as a living meme, and he seems to be fine with that. I think that's awesome. And I think that he definitely has the right take on this whole Twitter thing. I think he has the proper optimistic wherewithal. I think he has the wherewithal to really make it a good place. I did hear that they took out a bunch of really disgusting child abuse hashtags that Twitter said just couldn't be done. They couldn't do anything with them. And they got rid of them under Elon Musk already, which I think is awesome. And he's making one of his top priorities, which, man, I could not be happier. That is one of the things that really bothers me. I don't know if you guys saw the Balenciaga. I think that's how it's pronounced. Balenciaga had a really weird, really creepy, really suggestive ad featuring very small children who look very sad. And they were holding teddy bears that were wearing adult leather, for lack of a better description, gear. And it was just really unsettling. And on the table, they had papers from a lawsuit that made really interesting suggestions about using children and abusing children. So if you guys aren't familiar with that, that's a crazy story. Those kinds of people are among us. They are very powerful. They are making no secret of it. And it's something that we should all be aware of. I don't know if you guys might get in trouble for mentioning this, but I don't know if you guys remember Pizzagate. There was a huge conspiracy there. This guy charged into the store and was threatening people, which I didn't think was the right take. But again, if you know the details of this particular conspiracy, it would be weird if you didn't come away feeling like that should be done, because that is very disgusting stuff that makes you feel like you need a shower. Anyway, Elon is tackling a bunch of that stuff, and I'm excited for him. We'll come back to him in a minute. We'll talk a little bit. We're going to talk now about the ACLU, because they tweeted this out. And this is what I mean when I say I think that Thanksgiving breaks people's brains sometimes. They harp about this every single year, not the ACLU specifically, but in this instance, it is them. And you'll see a lot of this rhetoric around Thanksgiving, which is misguided, because Thanksgiving is a celebration of a historical event that we should all really take very seriously. Like, we should know, for example, that we are on native land. Okay, great. Now what? And I think that's fair to say, but I don't think it's enough. There is no context here. They're just saying you are where you shouldn't be. You're somewhere that you don't belong. And I responded to Blair White. You can see she's a top comment. I didn't want to scroll down because I try to keep it kind of family friendly, but she is just saying you're effing annoying over and over again. She only said it 8 times. They repeated their line 10 times. So I think that means they still beat her. I guess it's how this works. This is so dumb. This whole idea that if you just repeat something a certain number of times, it becomes true is crazy to me. I've never understood that. I hate that trend. That's a pet peeve for sure. But in any case, all the ACLU right here is doing, first of all, ACLU, don't get me started on them. They're actually not anything about predicting free speech anymore. I remember how skeptical my parents were about them, and they were not wrong about them. My parents also used to call Dan Rather Dan Blather. They used to call Barnes and Noble Barnes and Ignoble. So they came up with all these little dad jokes about all this stuff that it turns out they were right about. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, these people are kind of stodgy, sticks in the mud. And I'm like, oh no, yeah, they were right about everything. I think a lot of people have seen that, the ACLU, for example, which is supposed to be dedicated to making sure that everyone has free speech, says stuff like this. And they toe the leftist line and I would also blame that on Trump for sure, because I think they got a lot of money by lobbying, right, by campaigning kind of against him. And then they realized that they wouldn't be able to return to any kind of nuanced or moderate position after that. So they decided to stick to the leftist talking points. One of the things that I said under this one is that they are telling people who were born here 20 to 60 years ago that they don't belong here. If they don't belong here, they don't belong anywhere, because they were born here. These are the native people in this country now because they were born literally on the soil of this country. And I said the ACLU simply doesn't think they should exist. And I don't find that to be particularly hyperbolic. And I will tell you why. I came across a tweet that I'm not going to give too much of a spotlight to, because the instance of it was basically a threat of violence, which I don't feel like platforming. But it's a leftist meme, so it's already, we know it's going to be terrible. That goes without saying, but it's a picture of the main character from American Psycho. You guys are familiar with him. He looks a lot like Gavin Newsom, very unsettling, but in any case, he's grinning. He's crazy. He's capable of doing great violence. And the caption says, let me see, I don't remember exactly what it said. Oh, yeah, I think I sent this to somebody because I found it really fascinating, but I just don't want to platform it on this particular video because I don't think this person needs fame or attention. He said, "How I wake up knowing my enemies are ontologically evil and there is no act against them which is wrong." So that's a very interesting thing to put under an actual threat of violence on Twitter. And I think we will end today's live stream with a question about ontological evil. So we will circle back to that for sure. But this is genuinely what they believe. They think that people should not exist. You get that vibe looking at the green movement sometimes. You're like, oh, you really just hate people, don't you? You think there should be fewer of them. Well, this is certainly not what Elon Musk says. So we'll get into that a little bit later too. But I think that so many of the leftist talking points now are like, oh, well, people are terrible. We need fewer of them. And we're fine if there aren't as many of them. We're going to move over to this other one now, which I just messed up, unfortunately, but we won't worry about that. I found this picture so interesting. And this is what Wilfred Riley had to say about this. He said, PETA ads look like war propaganda for an alien race. If you guys don't follow Wilfred Riley, he's Will Da Beast 630 on Twitter. He's awesome. I appreciate his input for sure. And this is so strange to me because this is what PETA had to say. Point of view, that's what POV stands for, which everyone appears to have forgotten because this is not a POV shot. The dinner table's turned, and a family is gathering around your dead body to share why they're thankful. Really interesting. It does look like propaganda. It does look like it's for a very weird alien race, and I'll tell you why. If you look here, this turkey is expecting a baby. I'm not sure what universe they're in, but in this reality, on this planet, birds don't give live birth. That's kind of a differentiating factor between them and mammals. And if you look at this is such an intersectional picture because it looks like this turkey is a female turkey because of the necklace. That's a lot like the necklace that this clearly female one is wearing. And I was so intrigued by that. I was like, they're trying to check all their intersectional boxes on their piece of weird alien propaganda, and they're expecting this to resonate with people who like to, for example, eat turkey at Thanksgiving dinner. And it just made me scratch my head because I was like, what on earth? Who's their target market here? Who are they trying to reach? Because it's the same in politics. You aren't angling for the person who's like ordering 64-ounce steaks, every time they go out. And you're also not angling for vegans who are already on your side. What you're trying to do is convince people who aren't entirely sure or maybe feel a little bit guilty about eating turkeys. Yeah, that's not going to work when you use this art style, this weird, creepy alien nonsense. It just made me scratch my head because I was like, I don't see this compelling anyone to stop eating turkey. Based on what we know about PETA, similar to ACLU, who no longer serves the purpose for which they were founded, the PETA has insane rates of euthanasia for the animals that they rescue. If you're an animal and you're rescued by PETA, you're probably better off just living on the street or going to a normal pound. In fact, you might have a better chance at a normal pound at being adopted because PETA is crazy about euthanizing the animals that they shelter and the animals they rescue. So take whatever they say with a grain of salt because they are not fit for purpose as far as I'm concerned. They are not about treating animals ethically, and except in as far as they think that euthanasia is ethical. But anyway, we're kind of crazy freewheeling over here, but I wanted to touch on, before we move on to the Elon Musk party, this really interesting article that I found from The Guardian, and I just thought I would look at it with you guys. I haven't read it yet myself, full disclosure, but I'm really curious what they have to say because this to me looks like more of what we saw before, where the mainstream media appears to be kind of noticing that the trans ideology is actually really not good for kids, along with the Washington Post article, the really long article that we read, the beginning and the end of, where they were talking about puberty blockers and whether there might actually be some risks related to that. But let's read a little bit about this. So the title is An Explosion. What is behind the rise in girls questioning their gender identity? You should talk to Abigail Schreier because she wrote a full effing book about this and none of you guys were ever interested in reading it. So this goes. As the NHS reviews gender referrals, parents, clinicians, and young people reveal the social, medical, and emotional challenges they face. Okay, let's see where we're going with this. I love that the author's last name is Gentleman, Amelia Gentleman. Earlier this year, a team of NHS researchers was asked to investigate why there has been such a huge rise in the number of adolescent biological girls seeking referrals to gender clinics. The figures alone do seem remarkable. We know now that they're going to break down the figures. That's fine. I want to mention there are two ways right now that this article could go. They could say either that this is coming out of the woodwork because we have such inclusive, diverse, and equitable schools. We have such wonderful doctors who are taking care of children so, meaningfully, and they're just so comforting and so make the patients so at home that people feel comfortable sharing that they are trans, for example. Or they could say something along the lines of, there's a serious problem on social media, there's a serious problem in schools, and girls are being heavily affected by this stuff. Let's see which direction they go in. According to a study commissioned by NHS England 10 years ago, there were just under 250 referrals, most of them boys, to the Gender Identity Development Services run by Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust in London. Tavistock, if you guys know, was recently shut down, and my understanding is that it was because a lot of those doctors there were saying that it turned out that trans mindset was very much a phase for a lot of these kids, and they were actually, I believe they were being sued by people who had gone through a lot of this crazy gender change stuff. Last year, there were more than 5,000, which was twice the number of the previous year, and the largest group, about 2/3, now consisted of birth-registered females first presenting in adolescence with gender-related distress, the report said. Okay, it's a very clinical, very precise definition of who is facing this serious problem. This is young girls. Meanwhile, clinicians and parents are trying to make sense of it themselves. Over recent months, The Guardian's interviewed 11 parents of gender-questioning adolescent biological girls, some of whom have transitioned to become trans boys, and 6 pediatricians and child psychiatrists to discuss their views and experiences. For many of them, it's been difficult and emotionally draining time. Okay, sure, 100%. That makes sense. This is an unnecessary test of young children that I don't think is fair. This is not right to do to young girls. This is not right to do to any young child or any young person. This is incredibly unfair. Let's go down. They're talking about anxiety and uncertainty, about how to respond, particularly when their child was unhappy. Some parents had been relaxed when their daughters initially began identifying, but became uneasy when they said they wanted to take puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones. Interesting. So we have puberty blockers again. The mother of one girl who came out as trans at the age of 12 said it was very difficult to describe the feeling of being the parent of a trans-identified child. Okay. This mother feared they were heading toward medical intervention that might prove unnecessary. As she got older, we had less control. Living with that fear is one of the toughest experiences I've had. I can imagine. Her child, who recently started university, now describes herself as non-binary and uses the gender-neutral name, but is happy to be referred to as she and is no longer seeking medical treatment. That makes it sound like this is a phase, which is exactly what Tavistock concluded. Let's continue. We were terrified of being accused of being bigoted, said the woman, who asked to remain anonymous to protect her child's privacy. We felt we were expected to accept her decisions unhesitatingly. I felt apologetic that I was questioning whether my miserable teenage daughter was genuinely a boy. Wow. There is such a chilling effect on parents of children who are going through this and on children themselves, but especially on their parents, because parents fully understand some of the social implications of being like, no, I said that my child was not trans. I took them out of school. We put an end to that. They're terrified. In Canada, they can remove your child for even so much as saying that, for not referring to your child by their chosen pronouns. And there is no one there to course correct a child who just needs a little bit of guidance. And that's a serious issue. See, Andy's going to be so happy that I say it this way, but this is what happens when the state gets too big. But I will say that it's not just the state, although in Canada, it is the state removing your child. It is very much the social contagion that's taken over hospitals. This doesn't just affect young children. This has gone into hospitals, and I think it's simply a financial motivation for them to get these lifelong patients who need their care for the rest of their lives. To me, that's just such a huge red flag, that these people who undergo these actual transitional surgeries require care. They're going to be at a much higher risk of dying much younger than they would otherwise. That's a serious issue to me, because that to me makes perfect sense why then people would push this on very young people who are not old enough to make up their own minds yet. I think this is it should be such a red flag for you to be like, oh, okay, so doing this thing is going to result in someone who continues to give you money for the rest of their natural lives. Oh, okay, that's fine. That doesn't seem like you have a conflict of interest at all. I'm just kidding, obviously. It definitely does. All right, so let's see if there's more we want to read. Oh, okay. Okay, interesting. Here's a psychiatrist who says, like all NHS employees interviewed, she asked for anonymity due to sensitivity, blah, blah, blah. I might have seen one child with gender dysphoria once every 2 years when I started practicing. It was very niche and rare. Now, somewhere between 10 and 20% of her caseload is made up of adolescents registered as female at birth who identify as non-binary or trans, with just an occasional male registered teenager who identifies as trans. Another senior child psychiatrist said girls who wanted to transition made up 5% of her caseload. In the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a huge surge in young women who at the age of around 12 or 13 want to become boys. They've changed their name and they are pressing to have hormones or puberty blockers. The psychiatrist added, often those girls are children who are going through the normal identity and developmental problems of adolescence and finding a solution for themselves in this way. I don't know if you guys remember what it was like to be an adolescent. It was horrible. When I was an adolescent, I quickly grew to be 5 feet and 11 inches tall, and I was 180 pounds. My feet were about a size 10. I knew that I was no Disney princess. I knew that I was not petite. I felt very uncomfortable in my own skin, as most of us probably did when we were teenagers. And I thank my lucky stars every single day. First of all, that my parents were sane. My parents were very conservative. They would never have fallen for this in any situation. But also that no one pressed them to turn me into a trans boy, because that would have been very easy. And if I had been given that as some kind of solution to the weird feelings and the weird sensations of being a young woman in early adolescence, I don't know what I would have said. It could have made my life unbelievably difficult, unbelievably miserable. It could have sterilized me. And for this, I am so grateful that they didn't do that to me. But I completely empathize when young girls are going through this incredibly difficult situation when they're presented with a solution. Who in their right mind would not say, oh, that's really interesting. I want to know more about that. That makes perfect sense to me. This is why I think this shouldn't be given as a solution. I think that better parenting, better schools, there are so many societal issues that would make this so much better. But let's talk about what this person says next. The psychiatrist said often these girls or children going through, okay, we read this already, greater awareness of trans issues is likely to be one common sense explanation for the rise in requests for referrals. There it is. Left-handedness increased over time after we stopped punishing left-handed children in schools because some children are naturally left-handed and were now able to express it, said Cleo Madeline, a spokesperson for the trans support group Gendered Intelligence. Okay, so this is exactly what gender activists say. This is what trans activists have to say. The only reason there are more trans kids right now is because we've made it safer for them to be trans, which is one way of looking at it. I don't think that it is correct, but we'll look at it more. In the same way, increased visibility and acceptance of trans people has led to a gradual increase in young people who feel comfortable expressing their trans identity. The most important thing is to recognize that this is not a problem to be solved or a bad outcome to be avoided. That is entirely incorrect, and this person should not be commenting in this article. That is my 2 cents. You should not be talking to activists about this stuff, because that right there is also a conflict of interest, for sure. The mother of a 17-year-old A-level student who came out as trans at 13, leaving a handwritten letter for his parents on his bed, agreed it is discussed so much more on Facebook and on social media, it is no longer a taboo. She is confident this was the right decision for her child. I think I wondered if this was a phase, but I didn't look to dissuade him. As he began socially transition, he was a different person. It made him happier. Her trans son has a weekend job to pay for his private testosterone prescription because the NHS waiting list is too long, and the family is saving up for the $6,000 cost of, I believe it's called a total breast removal or mastectomy. It's terrible. I don't think that we should call any of this stuff gender affirming. You are not affirming a child's actual or natural gender. I think you should call it exactly what it is. You should call it exactly what doctors call it. I believe it's called a radical mastectomy, a bilateral radical mastectomy, if I'm putting those in the correct order. I haven't been in the healthcare field for quite a long time, but that sounds about right. I don't think that's right. I think this is a case of people having it exactly backwards. I think the whole idea that we're having more trans kids because there's more acceptance is very much like, most people don't know this, but I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. I know you guys are familiar with the self-esteem problem that we ran into, and part of the reason we have all these issues with millennials today is because they were told from an early age they needed to have self-esteem. They were awesome the way they were. They didn't need to change anything about themselves. This was all based on a backwards reading of a study that showed that kids who were successful, confident, and capable tended to have higher self-esteem. So they naturally concluded that the self-esteem was how you got there. And they had it exactly on its head. Once you are doing what you're supposed to be doing, when you have purpose, when you have meaning, when you have a true goal in life, you're going to have much higher self-esteem, especially when you feel like you're achieving the goals you need to get there. This is a classic case of having it backwards. They're looking at this and they're saying, oh, well, we have more trans kids because we're supporting them. When in fact, if the fact that it's geographically influenced should not even be an issue. If it would just because we were affirming them, if it were because it were less of a taboo. It is not the same in Idaho as it is in California, and it probably never will be. And that is a sign to me that it's not just because we're more accepting. There's definite social pressure, and especially among young girls who are very relationship oriented. We know this about women. This is not something new. This is nothing that even feminists can argue with, I don't believe. Females are more relationship oriented. There's a lot more peer pressure that can be exerted on a young girl than can be exerted on a naturally more disagreeable, more testosterone ridden young boy. And I personally believe that is exactly why this is happening here. So let's go down to the bottom and see what they ultimately conclude, since we've seen that they've kind of went in the direction of, oh, this is happening because we're nicer about trans issues. Oh, they're always raising money at the Guardian. My goodness. Okay, human interest stuff. Okay. The mother of a 20-year-old trans student said the process has been stressful, but on balance, she believed her child has become happier. My son, who was then my daughter, came out as a lesbian at 13 or 14. After they turned 15, my husband and I were called into school by my child's year head and turned out to be for an announcement that my daughter was now my son. Interesting that this should happen at school. I think the meeting was done that way because my son was concerned particularly about how his dad would react, and he needed there to be other people there. His dad's reaction was quite hostile. He said that for one thing, my son was being ridiculous, and for another thing, about to ruin his life. Maybe you should have given dad's views some weight for sure. I didn't understand everything, but I wanted to support him. This is a female being relationally oriented. This is a mom saying, I need to be on good terms with my kid. Doesn't matter. I'll support them whatever they do. I didn't feel I should interfere in my son's treatment. Instead, I just got involved in helping him with the practicalities of getting his name changed, speaking to the school about toilets and changing rooms. He went on testosterone at 18. I don't think he will have surgery. The thought of it makes him quite anxious, so I'm not sure how actively he wants to pursue it. In any case, he has passed as male for quite some time. She said the increased awareness of trans issues via the media made it easier for children who might be trans to communicate with others. In the 90s, when trans people began to be represented in the media, it was very much done for shock value. Things have changed since then. She said the process has been stressful, but in the end, I realized that people make all sorts of decisions in their lives that have long-term knock-on effects that can't be imagined at the time the decision is made. I think transitioning has been a positive step for my son. His mental health is much improved. He socializes now rather than just hiding away. Okay, so from this we can conclude that The Guardian writes truly terrible articles, because at the end of every single article should be a concise summary of what you went over in the article. This is not the case in this Guardian article, which is nothing but a string of anecdotal comments, stuff from activists, and ultimately the conclusion that this is all because we've made it more comfortable for trans people to come out in public. And I think they're entirely wrong. I'm looking forward to them doing a similar thing to what the I think it was the Washington Post did with their article about puberty blockers, where they started to realize that this is actually a problem. This article is not it. I'm glad that they're starting to notice that this is an issue for kids, but they're not realizing that it's not a good thing. I will add controversially too here that I am kind of inclined to agree with Scott Adams when he says stuff along the lines of, if this is what makes someone happy, and if they believe they made the right choice for their entire life, what right do we have to tell them that they can't do it? I don't really have an answer to that yet. So that's something that I'm still thinking about, because I do think that at the end of the day, you should have the option to make the choice that you think is right for yourself. I only conclude that you should only do this when you are a legal adult. I don't believe the libertarian concept that children belong to their parents when it comes to a decision like this. I know enough terrible parents who use their children as accessories and view them being trans as like an in-hip thing. I have a serious issue with that. Until we straighten out our generations and start teaching people to have common sense and to understand the long-term effects of their narcissistic choices for their children, I don't think that parents should have that right. That time may never come, so you guys just let me know what you think of Scott Adams' takes. That's fine. I think that people can do whatever they like once they're informed adults, as long as I don't have to pay for it. I think that's fully fair, but I digress. Anyway, let's get into a little more lighthearted conversation, because I told you that I was going to talk about Elon Musk, and we sure are. So this is something new that he's introducing. He's starting a verified service with colors to start next week. I don't know if you guys noticed, but these blue checks are actually blue now. Before, at least in dark mode, they were always white. Now they're blue. So I'm assuming they're going to continue to do something similar. Chief Executive Elon Musk, I bet that hurts Reuters to write a lot, on Friday allotted colors for the categories: gold for companies, gray for governments, and a blue check for individuals, including celebrities. I actually really like this idea. All right, so let's see what Crypto King has to say about this, since they've included his tweet in their article. Elon, I'm trying, it won't let me, and I'm verified. Need to edit one character I can't spell. Sorry for the delay. We're tentatively launching verified on Friday next week. Gold check for companies, gray check for government, blue for individuals, celebrity or not, and all verified accounts will be manually authenticated before a check activates. Painful but necessary. Very interesting. I think that's the only way to do this. I personally didn't much care for the idea of just being able to buy your check, because I don't know how many of you guys use Twitter, but I use Twitter a lot, and to me the blue check actually makes a difference. It lets me know, for example, that the person I'm conversing with is actually who they say they are. For me, that's the most important perk. That's the most important benefit. But now that everybody has a check, it's very challenging to know for sure if the person bought it, although I'm glad that they give you the option to see if that's something that they did, or if they're actually, like, for example, I'm looking for journalists, I'm looking for people who work for governments, I'm looking for, influencers, and hopefully Elon's, that's not a bad idea, right? I like the idea of just doing a different color with the same kind of, excuse me, I have the hiccups now. I have to forgive me. A different kind and color of check. I think that's a pretty good compromise. My gosh, I lost my ability to talk when I got the hiccups. All right, and let's talk about this hilarious thing that Elon Musk just did. Elon Musk trolls critics with a new stay-at-work merchandise following a woke discovery. I posted about this on my Instagram if you guys saw that. I know I talk about social media all the time. What can I say? I'm a millennial. It's where I live. The new photo came a day after Musk found Stay Woke t-shirts at Twitter HQ. So I posted the video of him going into this closet that was just stuffed with t-shirts that said hashtag Stay Woke. And his response to this is so funny and so great, because the people who left Twitter weren't necessarily fired. A lot of them just quit. He gave them the option to work really, really hard or to quit with severance. And a lot of them took the choice to just leave, which more power to them. I'm glad they decided not to stick around. Let's read this article. Elon Musk took to Twitter on Wednesday to troll critics and former employees of his company in a new Twitter merchandise reveal. The day after Musk found and revealed a closet full of Stay Woke t-shirts at Twitter headquarters, a catchphrase often used by those on the ideological left, the new Twitter executive, I just lost my place. The new Twitter boss retconned this design and revealed a new Stay at Work shirt. Awesome new Twitter merch, he captioned the photo. It's hilarious. You guys have to tell me what you think of this, because I freaking love it. Even before he started at Twitter, I remember he was going through this with the Tesla employees and telling them they had to come back to work in person. If they didn't, it would be considered a resignation. I never had an issue with that. I don't know about you guys, but I never worked from home. I never worked remotely. I never even got the choice, and we were fine. I mean, we all ended up catching COVID. It wasn't a huge deal for us because we were healthy, relatively young people. We ended up isolating for a while, and it ended up being just fine. And I think it's fully fair for the boss of a company or two to expect people to come in person, because there's really no way to manage people unless you can see them and talk to them. Honestly, communicating face to face is much more effective than just firing off an email that somebody can just ignore. And I think people 100% do get too comfortable working from home. They tend to get distracted. They've got their pets there. They've got, all their little distractions and creature comforts. And I have nothing against like working out during the day, even at work. But at the same time, it tends to be more of a distraction than a boss who's trying to get people to be productive and do meaningful things with their time would like. So it makes sense to me. I think that's hilarious. I'm not going to talk about the hate speech thing because there's kind of mixed reviews on that one. But let's look at this one. He asks the question. He titles it Need Advice. And he says, what do you think of the culture war? And he got some really great responses. Ian Miles Chong had a good solution for him that he ended up responding to. Somebody mentioned, I think the right needs to start funding more artists, filmmakers, and writers instead of politicians and super PACs. I think that's fair. This is something that Andrew Breitbart said as well. Tim said, we need more people. More people means more specialists, better technology, obviously space colonization, which is something Elon's been talking about. Scott Pressler brought up the example of genderqueer being in schools, and he was like, I have a serious issue with this. This to me looks like the culture war. Colin Wright talks about allowing woke ideology to capture all our major institutions out of fear of being labeled. Yeah, I think that's fair too. So I love all these different takes, and I love that he asks this question. He uses such a platonic style that I think some people take to mean he's kind of dumb. He's not. Plato was not stupid. Asking simple questions to get feedback and to figure out what people are really thinking is not stupid. It's incredibly smart, and I really approve of it. Let's see what else fascinating things he did. Oh, that's just his Twitter account. Okay. All right. Well, I think this kind of ends where I was going with this, all this talk of Elon Musk. I personally view him as doing wonderful things. I know there's a lot of mixed opinions about him. He's certainly not the end all be all. And as Andy will tell you, you don't want a single point of failure. You want to diversify who's in charge of all this stuff. And you should not leave like free speech up to a single person. I genuinely get the vibe from Elon Musk that he's very much like Donald Trump was to them in 2016. He was unexpected, unorthodox, and he's not in their grasp. And they're having a really hard time with this. They're predicting all sorts of crazy stuff. They're like, oh, hate speech is going to be up like crazy, which then leads right into the question of whether Twitter is a publisher or a platform. And it looks to me, honestly, with that question, it looks like Elon is prepared to make Twitter the right balance between being a platform and being a publisher, because he's asking all the right questions. He is pursuing answers to basic questions that, you know, the smart people probably would think they had already known. And I think he's making all the right moves. I'm not pinning all my hopes on him, but I think he seems to be working in good faith. I don't view him as right-wing. I think that he is simply trying to figure out what's true and what's not. And unfortunately, at this point, that kind of default makes him right-wing, which is a really interesting place to be in. But I will wrap by asking all of you guys this one final question. Question of the day. Is any person ontologically evil? It's a very interesting response I got to sharing that meme, that leftist meme that I found. I said, you know, this is what they really think. You should believe them when they tell you who they are. And I think that's a fair analysis, because if someone is telling you that they think that you're ontologically evil, they're not going to treat you fairly, obviously. My conclusion with that meme was that the writer needs to actually just go outside and talk to some people who don't agree with him on 100% of everything, because you'll find that you always have more in common with the people around you than you think you do, especially if you are heavily, heavily online. That person needs to, as they say, touch grass for sure, because it will help him recenter and figure out whether he actually thinks that his neighbor who walks her dog past his house every morning and waves hello is ontologically evil just because she doesn't agree with him about a tax rate or something. I think he would find that that kind of stilted, memeified, leftist kind of thinking is absolutely brittle, incredibly fragile, because as soon as you meet somebody and you get to know them and they're kind of awesome and cool and have a different perspective, and then you realize that you don't agree with them on politics, oh my gosh, that will shake your very core. Because if you've been going along thinking that yes, they're evil, yes, they're evil, yes, they're evil, and it's great that they're all evil and we're all good because that makes the world really simple, you're going to be stunned to realize that everyone is comprised of both good and evil. Let's see here. Judeo-Christian idea, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So this is the way I was raised. Everyone is fundamentally not great. Like I think it was Scott Adams. We listen to him pretty much every day. I think he's awesome. He really puts in the work to make sure people have plenty to think about, which is wonderful. Everyone needs more to think about. He mentioned that, oh no, it wasn't him. Sorry, it was an audiobook that Andy's listening to right now. He mentioned that whether you think people are basically good or basically bad, that is exactly what you'll see in the world, which kind of lines up with the old quote that whether you believe you will succeed or fail, you will. It just depends on what you believe. And I think that's certainly a case of it is exactly what you think it is, which also overlaps nicely with Stoicism because it's all about shifting your perspective because that's one of the only things that you control. I think that people are fundamentally flawed, and this makes me a misanthrope. Don't be like me, and don't be like the left. I think that kind of the Judeo-Christian principle can make people who are a little introverted kind of misanthropic because you're just like, oh, I don't like people. Oh, look at that. People are terrible. I don't like anyone. Blah, blah, blah. They're so annoying. I don't know what it is. Not a big deal. But I think that you need to find a happy medium between being confident that people can be better and believing that everyone's great and wonderful and good and capable of such, absolute perfection, because that's obviously not true either. But yeah, my last note on this is anyone who thinks their enemy is ontologically evil needs to go touch grass and or talk to somebody at the freaking gas station or grocery store, because you will quickly find that is not the case at all. People are much more nuanced than a meme would indicate. I know it's hard to believe, but here we are. All right, I have talked more or less nonstop for 41 minutes. I'm honestly pretty impressed with myself. Thank you all for staying with me. Again, I hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving. I hope you guys are busy getting ready for Christmas. I'm about to order some My Pillow stuff, I think, for our Christmas. It's going to be very cozy and comfy. We need some slippers in our lives, and I think that might be the right place to get them. Oh, we need sheets too. Oh, cool. I have a whole list of stuff to get. So I think I'm going to shop with them. I hear good things about the sheets. If you guys have better sheet suggestions that aren't Bull and Branch because they're way too expensive, by all means, let me know. Oh, we got a great chat going on here, and I'm going to read this super chat because it's my only one. Paul says, hope you had an amazing Thanksgiving, smiley face. I certainly did. We had a great time. Family is the reason for the season, and we got to hang out with a whole bunch of them, and that was very meaningful to me. Let me see what you guys are saying in the chat. Key lime pie can be heavenly. Yeah, I used a box this year, but I'm not going to do that next year. I like to make it myself, and it's pretty straightforward. Elon has been amazing. Elon is a mad genius. I mean that in the most complimentary way. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Bondage gear. Yep, leather. Bondage, leather, BDSM stuff, not good. The Balenciaga ad, look it up. It's terrifying. Oh man, it's no good. Dystopian, yeah, the ad. Let's see. Isn't that what you do at funerals? Gathering, mourning, being thankful, remembering, and more. Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to remind all of you guys, you need to remember that you will die. And that's another Stoic practice that I think that Americans are really bad with. Jocko Willink talks a lot about how we really don't have like a way of dealing with grief. We don't have any like practices for making sure that people are taken care of or that they're properly processing it. And he has this... Akira the Don remixed one of his little speeches about loss, and it's called, I believe, Waves of Sorrow, and it's one of the most impactful spoken word songs I think that you will ever hear, and possibly one of the most impactful songs you'll ever listen to. I might actually drop a link to that in the description because that is such a powerful song, and Jocko Willink is one of the most profound thinkers of our time because he's able to... Profound doesn't mean that he speaks in flowery language. In fact, quite the opposite. He takes very complex topics and he turns them into simple, concise, really powerful statements. And I will drop that link in the description for sure because it's so important. Yes, remember that you will die and live every day as if it is your last. When you wake up the next day, you can be grateful that you have that day and remember that that day might be your last too. I think that's the only way to live with the proper sense of urgency and to get all the things done. Lids has her own show. Yes, she does. It is the Lids Power Hour. Just kidding. I don't have a name for it yet. Yep, she gone solo. That's correct. Oh, 12 minutes until Game of Thrones level story twist. Oh, womp womp. Sorry. No, I changed topic in the middle and then that article was kind of what I expected. Hit the like button. Help it go viral. That's right. We do want to go viral. It's very important to me. Just kidding. It's not really. But if you guys appreciate it, my mindset has always been if I help even one person reach a conclusion that they wouldn't have otherwise, I am delighted to do it. I just love talking and just like flapping. For a long time, I wasn't really talking at all. And it was kind of challenging. People really need the option to speak and to feel that they're being heard, which is why the First Amendment exists. And I think that, Carter's in the chat. Carter rocks. Oh, hello, everyone. Awesome. Carter's chilling. We love Carter. He has a card he likes to play that would get me in trouble on YouTube. Lauren Chen post, the Twitter before and after post was really telling. Yeah, so I think they're referring to all of these hashtags that were removed. There was some really disgusting, really disturbing. Guys, this stuff is in plain sight. And no one at Twitter did anything about it. They're like, we can't. We really can't. And I hear a lot of Antifa accounts are being taken as well, which is really interesting too. Oh, sweet. We got Carter. We got Andy. We got the father-in-law in the chat. Somebody says getting better, Lids. I appreciate that. Tonight, I don't know if you guys noticed, but I pulled up 3 different things to talk about. So instead of just focusing on one thing, we all got joint whiplash together as we spun from one thing to the next. I left you all with a question about ontological evil. If you guys aren't familiar with the term, it means existential or fundamental. It's just a big word, such as you could expect to find in a leftist meme. Good times. Lydia, will Ian be a guest? That's actually a really interesting idea. Possibly so. I think that I'm going to try to have like everybody on the show at some point. So over the course of that time, I'm sure we'll have pretty much everybody that we used to have, including maybe, I don't know, some of the guys who took my job. I love Lids being with Nick Freitas, my favorite to watch. Very happy to hear that. So Making the Argument is a really fun little podcast that we do twice a week. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we drop our episodes. And the last one we did was about so it was a historical story about Jamestown. And then on Tuesday of this week, we talked about how to get through Thanksgiving without losing any major relationships over political discussions. So that was a really fun philosophical conversation that kind of got to the heart of what makes us disagree. And this reminds me a little bit of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind. I think that's what it's called, which is about why good people disagree over politics. Because we do. It's true. And I don't believe that my enemies are ontologically evil. I believe they're misled. I believe they haven't been taught to think critically. And I think that they're very, very ideological in some sense. But I don't think they're ontologically evil at the end of the day. So I will sign off with that. Thank you all very much for joining me. As I said earlier, Andy and I are going to try to do a live stream tomorrow at 10 a.m. And then we're going to be working on the studio all weekend. That's going to be awesome. So stay tuned for all those wonderful new changes going forward. Laura says, great job, Lydia. Heart emoji. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all you guys' support. That means a lot to me. All right. Until tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Bye, guys.